Well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you're at today. It's a pleasure to be here with you all live in person or perhaps in our recording. My name is Danielle Lucido, and I am actually a member of the Leadership Excellence at Harvard Square. Been around with Dan since pretty much the beginning of the organization's start. And it's been a pleasure to see it grow and the robust nature of all of the members alike that are growing themselves and growing their teams and their communities. But I'm coming to you from Orlando, Florida, and when I'm not facilitating fantastic webinars like this, I work as a client partner for Franklin Covey, which is a company that really helps enable greatness in people and organizations everywhere. So I'm thrilled to be here today to really unpack this incredible book from Professor Zeynep Tan, which I will introduce her in a moment, but wanted to do a little bit of housekeeping just to kind of give you a sense of what will happen today. So first off, we are going to basically have an interview style. I will keep an eye on the chat. So if you have questions, we'll try to answer them at the end. Sometimes I sprinkle them in the course of the interview. We may not be able to get to all of them, but if I can, I will try to pull some of those out today. And second, I do have a dog, and in today's Zoom world, every now and then, if a mailman comes or got some mail delivered, he may bark, but I will put myself on mute and carry on. So with that, let me introduce our fantastic author today. We are going to be speaking to Professor Zeynep Tan, who wrote the book, The Case for Good Jobs, How Great Companies Bring Dignity, Pay, and Meaning to Everyone's Work. And let me introduce her briefly, and we can dive in. Professor Tan is a professor of practice in the Operations Management Group at MIT Sloan School of Management. She is also president of the nonprofit organization Good Jobs Institute, where she works with companies to improve their operations in a way that satisfies employees, customers, and investors. And before joining MIT Sloan, Tan spent 7 years on the faculty at Harvard Business School. She lives in Cambridge, Massachusetts with her 4 children. And a fun fact about Professor Tan, or Zeynep Tan, is that she came to the US on a volleyball scholarship. So without further ado, let's give a welcome to Professor Tan. Yay.
Thank you so much, Danielle. I'm so delighted to be here. And Dan, thank you for inviting me. Your organization is called Leadership Excellence. I love the word excellence. And in fact, when I pitched my book to Harvard Business Review Press, the title was Choosing Excellence. But then I got overturned for the case for good jobs.
That's quite all right? Things happen. It's a creative, iterative process.
It is.
So I would love to kind of, before we dive into the robust content and research, walk us back about sort of your background. What inspired you to write the book? How have you come from where being a volleyball athlete to where you are today? Tell us about your background.
Yeah, I'll give a very quick summary. I came to the United States in 1992 to Penn State and to play volleyball because I had that scholarship. And I fell in love with academics while I was there. I studied industrial engineering. And after engineering, I went to Harvard Business School to do my doctorate. And my doctorate focused on retail supply chains, so mostly inventory management. And early on in my studies, along with my colleagues, of course, my advisor, we saw that, retail supply chains are all about planning, analyzing, optimizing, assortment, inventory, pricing, etc. But what we found was that inside the retail stores, problems inventory related problems had a huge negative impact on supply chain performance. For example, products were not where they were supposed to be, inventory data were inaccurate, etc. And early on, I quantified the size of these problems, impact on these problems, and was struck by how expensive they were, and asked the question, why do they happen all the time? And that's where I met the people part of operations. And early on found that, stores that have high employee turnover have more problems. Stores that are understaffed, where employees are burnt out, they have more problems. And many companies were operating in this vicious cycle of low people investment, high employee turnover, poor operational performance, then lower sales and profits, which then continued, led to less employee investment, and the vicious cycle continued. So that was, my early, probably 7 years of work. Then I thought, this doesn't make sense, because in this world, everyone loses. The customers lose because they don't get to have great service. They don't have to get the lowest prices. The investors lose because companies leave a lot of money on the table, stockouts, lower sales, higher shrink costs, and lower labor productivity. And employees lose because they have really bad jobs. When I came here, US was always seen as the land of opportunity. And I thought that if you worked hard in this country, you would do really well. And for the most part, I lived that American dream. But then as I started spending time inside retail stores, I started meeting so many competent, hardworking employees, working hard, multiple jobs, and they weren't making it, right? They had low pay, their schedules change all the time, and they felt little respect and dignity in that work. And that part of it appealed to my heart as well as to my head, in terms of how costly this problem was. So I started looking for a better way, and I found that better way across multiple companies in the retail space, and I'm happy to get into that. But that was how this whole thing started, Danielle, and we can get to that better way and how to change into that better way, etc. But that was the origins.
The precipice of really kind of like, oh my goodness, like, stumbling across the human impact and how that affects everyday hardworking, amazing workers that want to make a better life for themselves and their families, and also better for business. So I love that. And yes, we're gonna dive into all these case studies, statistics. Your book is chock full of not only just statistics and studies, but great metaphors and great stories of how you can transform cultures. Before we dive into, walk us a little bit back into your experience as a volleyball athlete, and sort of, I almost feel like your other inspiration was the fundamentals of being inspired by a coach teaching you the basics of how to just get the basics right. Tell us a little more about that.
First I will brag a little bit about my coach, because he retired a couple of years ago. And when he retired, he was the winningest coach in NCAA history across all sports. And under his leadership, Penn State women's volleyball won 6 championships. So he is a coach. And one of the things that I learned from him, so he's a coach who wins. One of the things that I learned from him, which is, pretty universal, is to be able to win. Everyone needs a great team that's set up for success. And coach was able to take us, I couldn't have played for other teams in the United States. And here I was on the starting lineup for Penn State. He took ordinary people like me and created extraordinary performance out of us. And that was his magic. And the other thing is he focused on the fundamentals of the business, right? So many coaches get distracted by cool new techniques or cool technologies they could use for their coaching, and coach always focused on the fundamentals. We did the same drills all the time, and we got really good at it. And once we had those fundamentals well, then we had flexibility to adjust to different teams. So that, I call it standardization and focus and simplify in the good job strategy, but that enabled us to be flexible. And the final thing is he had very high expectations from us. I mean, he set the bar really high. We always, wanted to do better because of those high expectations, but he had deep care for us. And that combination of very high expectations along with deep care for people is what respect is all about.
Yes, and those are principles that you can take into every endeavor you do, especially the next generation as you teach these operational fundamentals with your students. That's fantastic. I'd love to take us to sort of where the book begins, which is really about setting the foundation for the world at large. And your heading is around escaping mediocrity. And you sort of get into like the nuances of our economic world, from burnout to life expectancy to the lack of trust. Walk us through sort of the foundation of escaping fundamentals or escaping mediocrity and where you go from there in that section.
Yeah, and maybe it would be helpful to set the stage for the type of work that I focus on, Danielle, because I focus on my research focuses on what we may call unglamorous work, right? Unglamorous work in terms of, working at the call centers, answering calls from customers, working in retail stores, shelving merchandise, cleaning the floors, and bringing stuff from the back rooms, in restaurants, right? In cafes, baking bread or preparing food. This work is not necessarily the most exciting work, right? And there are so many people who can do this work. And a lot of companies use the theory of the law of supply and demand when they set their pay, their wages. So because so many people can do this work, the conventional wisdom when you use market pay is to pay people low prices, low wages. And what I saw was that low pay, people are not like other market-based inputs, they're not soybeans, and how much we pay workers ends up affecting the quality of their output, because low pay, when people are not paid enough and they can't make ends meet, then that low pay is associated with less health, physical health, obesity, heart attacks, so many physical health problems. Low pay is associated with worse mental health, right? It is associated with suicides. It's associated with opioid use, so many other things. And then low pay is also associated with lower cognitive functioning, which is equivalent to losing 13 IQ points or not having slept through the night at all. So low pay hurts employees a lot more than we may think. And invariably, it hurts their ability to function. So the starting point of mediocrity is low pay, which results in both low employee ability because of the pay itself, and it drives turnover. And employee turnover is so common in these industries that people are numb to it. We work with organizations that change their entire roster in a year, and they never really question it because our industry is a low pay, high turnover industry. But turnover costs employees in companies a lot more than they may think. When there's high turnover, of course, there are direct employee turnover costs. Those of you who are in the audience who are in the HR world know that there's the hiring costs, onboarding costs, training costs, time to full productivity. But those direct costs are the lowest cost of turnover. Then there are those operational execution costs, which are in the retail stores, that's what my original research was about. Misplaced products, data inaccuracy, frustrated customers. And then the biggest turnover cost is that when companies operate with high turnover, they end up creating an entire system that's a low trust system. It's a low expectation system, because when turnover is high, then frontline managers are so busy fighting fires that they can't hire and train the right people, right? And of course, if they haven't hired the right people, they can't train them well. They don't want to empower them, right? Everyone hears, I imagine, understands the power of empowerment, right? If we can empower people to improve performance, if we can empower them to solve customer problems, if we can empower them to drive sales and reduce costs, it will be better for the company and it will be better for workers, because empowerment is a source of motivation. But high turnover companies can't empower people because they can't trust them. They can't trust their ability, or they can't trust their motivation. So we end up creating an entire system that is a weak system, and it ends up being an inhumane system as well. So that's the type of mediocrity that I'm talking about. And how can you win with customers, right? Coming back to my coach, right, winning. Like, how can companies win with their customers if they don't have employees who don't make enough to focus on the job? How can they win with their customers if employees are not empowered to take care of the customers? So it's also a system that's not very competitive.
You laid the groundwork fantastically, because it really is, as you propelled that whole line of thinking, it is the vicious cycle, as you describe a few times in the book. And the flip side is a virtuous cycle, and really shifting perceptions in the organization on all those pieces that are really, really important to do the right thing, and to add value to the customer. What is, in your experience, has been, what else when it comes to, like, there's also a gap in the CEO pay, and you also mentioned CEOs being a little out of touch. Tell us more about that piece.
Yeah, one of the things that we learned working with numerous organizations now, over 24, is there's tremendous disconnect between what we think is happening in the front lines and what actually is happening. And there's also tremendous disconnect between those of us who have the top level versus the ones on the floor. One is, we tend to underestimate the importance of pay for workers' well-being and their dignity, right? One of the CEOs that we work with, he said his mother told him when he was, he grew up in poverty. And he said, my mother used to say, when you don't make enough, pay is everything. When you make enough, pay is nothing. So the importance of pay is just underappreciated for oftentimes for people at the top. And how hard the work is in the front lines is oftentimes underappreciated too. In so many organizations, we find that there are all sorts of functions in the home office that send directives to the front lines that make their work very difficult. And unless you spend time in the front lines, you don't appreciate how hard the work can be and how hard people's lives can be. One of the companies, and one of my business hero is Jim Sinegal, the co-founder of Costco. Costco is a fantastic, it's been around since 1983 and provides great value for their customers, and a very customer-centered organization. But when Jim was the CEO, and he was the CEO for many years, he used to spend 200 days in the front lines at the stores. Why? Because he would tell my students when he comes to my class, he says, that's where the most important work takes place. That's where our brand meets the customer. That's where Costco makes money. So I think if we spent more time in the front lines as leaders, we would learn so much and perhaps overcome some of those disconnects.
Absolutely. Until it kind of you face it directly or experience it. In your book, you reference a lot of CEOs and senior leaders just weren't even aware how impactful that difference was. I mean, you reference PayPal, for example, and a few others that did some analysis around some assessments, a wellness survey, and they were surprised by what they found, because they didn't know really how much they were not paying their team members. And then that, of course, affects the vicious cycle and affects their ability to perform. Tell us a little bit about...
Can I just give that example really quickly, Danielle? Because that's the PayPal one was so striking. A bunch of executives from PayPal were volunteering at a food bank. And here they are volunteering at the food bank. And then the food bank's executive director pulls them aside and says, the people who come to our food bank are your own employees. And that was a shock to the executives. How can it be that we pay market, even above the market? How is it that our employees are coming to the food bank? Like, they can't make ends meet. And then they did an analysis of their workers to find that 2/3 of the call center entry-level workers did not make ends meet. It was a shock to them. It was a shock to them so much that they created an entire movement called Worker Financial Wellness Initiative, because Dan Schulman, who was the CEO of PayPal, he wants to have all the other CEOs know that, look, just look at the data, collect data. How much are your employees making? Are they making a living wage? Are they able to take care of their families? Just understand it. That's the first step, right? And thank you for bringing up that example, because it was a shock. It was really a shock to them.
Yeah, I was touched by that. That story about the employees working at the food bank, and then her bringing that to their attention. Let's dive into a little bit around the fundamentals of what you kind of discovered. You talk about the 4 choices. You talk about managing capacity well, and a number of other things. Tell us what the 4 choices are and kind of how you came to distill that as far as the beginnings of your framework.
Yeah. So the good job, so the 4 choices and investment in people is what I call the good job strategy. And it is a strategy about winning, right? It's about winning with customers. And of course, it has the team element, investment in people. And then it has the other element, the 4 choices. And the 4, if we imagine, let's imagine that winning system together. And I think will be obvious to everyone here. If we wanted to create, if the problem that we were trying to solve was, how do we serve the customer really well, create great value for the customer, and how do we have high productivity and have our employees who have dignity, right? And motivated, capable people. If that was the problem to solve, of course we would not pay market pay. Of course we would invest in our workers so that they can focus on the job, they can do a good job, have strong attendance. So part of the good job strategy is heavy investment in people. So at Costco, the average pay in 2022 was $26 an hour. In the United States, in retail at the time, the average pay was $16 an hour. So $10 an hour more than the average. So part of it is heavy investment in people. But of course, pay alone does not make the job a good job, and pay alone doesn't create high productivity. So the secret sauce of the good job strategy is these operational choices that both improve productivity and contribution of employees, but also improve their motivation. So the choices are focus and simplify, standardize and empower. They're right behind me here in this here. Focus and simplify, standardize and empower, cross-train and operate with Slack. And we can get into each of those details, but focus and simplify is about, focus on what you want to be the best at for the customer, and be comfortable, have courage to give up on things that you're not going to be the best at, and simplify so that people's work can be doable, so that they can be productive, so they can be knowledgeable about the products and the services that the company offers. And when employees are more productive, when they're more knowledgeable, not only is their job better because they can shine in front of the customers, but it's now they're more productive so that the company can pay them more. Standardize and empower is the secret combination of job design, right? And one of my favorite examples is, since we have a lot of people here from India, one of my examples of standardize and empower is from Oberoi Hotels in India, right? In Oberoi Hotels, which has one of the highest net promoter scores that I've ever seen. Many of their hotels have more than 90 net promoter score, which is, how would you recommend this place to a friend? And their secret is, on the one hand, they have standardized so many of the practices, but they empower their frontline employees, who are oftentimes, the lowest paid workers in their organization. They empower them to anticipate customer needs, to solve customer problems, and see the problems even before customer brings that out. And that type of empowerment, of course, makes the job a better job, but it also enables companies to create better customer value and increase their sales. And again, that's why the companies can pay their employees more. The third choice is cross-train. And this is, cross-training, of course, makes the job more interesting because you're doing a variety of tasks, but it's also a form of flexibility. You can react to the changes in customer demand, and change what employees do versus change the number of people. And the trick about cross-training is to do it in a way that also preserves some specialization and mastery. And then the final choice, which is my favorite operational choice, is operate with Slack. And if anyone in this audience feels like they're burnt out, they don't have enough time to do everything, they will understand this choice. It is to staff environments with more people than the expected workload. And if anyone has ever taken operations management, it's like one of the biggest ahas of queuing theory. Of course, if you have any system with variability, you would never want 100% capacity utilization, because you need some slack to be able to deal with that variability. And operating with Slack, giving people enough time to do a good job, enables them to perform really well, because now they don't have to cut corners. Now they can really serve the customer, but it also enables them to have a sane life and be healthy enough to take care of themselves and to take care of their families, and of course the customer as well. So those are the 4 choices, and this is a system. It's a system that works together. You can't empower people if you don't trust them, right? So empowerment requires trust. Trust requires investment in people. You can't operate with Slack if you have slackers, right? So operating with Slack requires a high performance environment, and good job strategy is a high performance, high expectations system.
Yeah, thank you for walking us through that. And it says easy and does hard. Even though these are 4 choices of focus and simplify, standardize and empower, and then the other cross-train and operate with Slack. They sound simple, but they're hard to actually implement. But when you do, it ignites that virtuous cycle, which is where you're going to make sure you're staying ahead. We did have a comment by one of our guests today, Jermaine, mentioning to effectively standardize processes, you must find hidden patterns that the front-end employees create to get around problems. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, workarounds are so common in so many organizations. And I will say, it's easy to say standardize, but how you standardize is so important. If you look at Toyota production system, right? And it's the same with Oberoi. It's the same with Mercadona, the Spanish retailer, where I first saw this good job strategy in action. It's the same with Quick Trip. It's a convenience store chain. But it's so important to standardize with input from front lines, observe their work, talk to them, involve them in standardization, and always help involve them to improve the standards, because just because you're doing something this way doesn't mean that that's going to be the right way for so many years. The standards have to be improved all the time, and we need to understand the work. We need to understand the front lines and get their inputs to improve that all the time.
Yeah. It's so fascinating too. I'm also often reminded by your work and the discipline. You mentioned a couple organizations around their strategic choices. Just because a spreadsheet says something doesn't necessarily mean it's going to make sense, right? So, an example you referenced too is about frontline workers, adding toothpaste to someone that was only had like half a tube, and so it's allowing the frontline workers to be agile and stay ahead of it, versus letting the larger organizations just kind of lug along, and they miss opportunities to be that customer centric, which is so true.
Exactly.
Yes.
In so many organizations, especially those that are in a vicious cycle, performance tends to be poor, customer loyalty tends to be poor, right? And then leaders are so much under performance pressure. They need to improve performance somehow. What do? They either point to cut, which, of course, refuels that vicious cycle, or what can be even more dangerous is they add. So they add more products, they add more services, they add more hours, and very suddenly you realize that you don't have a strategy because you're trying to be all things to all people, and the complexity is so high on the floor because people, there has been so many things that had been added. And when the work is that complex, I give the example of Starbucks baristas who have so many drinks that they have to make, and they are constantly thinking about how to make the drinks. And now customers come with their TikTok orders, right? This is the TikTok drink, make this for me. But they're so focused on that complexity, they don't have the mental capacity to be able to take care of the customer, right? Empowerment becomes very difficult when you overburden people with tedious, complex tasks. So that type of the lack of focus and lack of simplification makes it very difficult to empower.
Yes, exactly. And we're also inundated from an attention standpoint, from a change standpoint. And so, and if you're operating without Slack, you mean, just kind of like to the T, from a staff, you don't have that extra capacity to learn something new and to roll out something new, because change, any type of change, even small changes, do require a little bit of a dip in productivity sometimes, just because they're learning something new. So you're right. Can you imagine having all those changes and how that slows everything down and creates frustration for everyone? So I love that example, just to kind of paint the picture of how too much can actually be detriment.
Yeah, and on the other hand, if there is this system, right? Companies that have the system. So I'll give the Spanish Mercadona as an example. In 2009 is when I studied them, and there was an economic crisis, global economic crisis in 2009. But they have this system, which is a combination of great people who are set up to succeed because they have the 4 choices, which meant that they could change much faster than their competitors could change. From 2008 to 2009, Mercadona, a company with single-digit profit margins, were able to reduce their prices by 10%, which was a huge deal for their customers. And of course, that enabled them to capture even more market share. So the economic crisis, Mercadona emerged from it as a much stronger company because they have this continuous improvement execution muscle that comes from the system that they built.
Absolutely, and keeps them rolling along, and like we talked about, agile, so they can continue to survive, because the best ideas are typically the ones that are offered by the front line, closest to the customer. Yes. So you also, so you worked with more than 24 organizations, and it's continuously growing. And this good job strategy works for basically all industries that you've come across so far, or most of them. Walk us through another example. I think Quest Diagnostic was another fantastic example of a call center. Tell us a little more about that work that you've done.
Yeah, and I'll say one thing that, in 2014 is when my first book came out, The Good Job Strategy, and I mentioned these 4 choices of investment in people. And one of the reactions I got was, look, but I am stuck in that vicious cycle. Like, we are in that vicious cycle, and I can understand Mercadona, I can understand Quick Trip, I can understand Costco that are operating in that vicious cycle, but I'm not there. Is it possible to, because it seems like so many things need to change. Is it even possible to get out of that vicious cycle? Is it possible to adopt the system when you don't have it? So with Sarah Calick, who was my star student, we started nonprofit Good Jobs Institute, and we started working with companies to help them move from that vicious cycle to the virtuous cycle. And one of the examples that I mentioned in the book is Quest Diagnostics. And they adopted the Good Job Strategy in their call centers. And in 2015, if you looked at their call centers, they were operating in that vicious cycle, right? And Quest Diagnostics, their customers are either patients who are calling to understand their lab results, test results. These are people, who are oftentimes nervous, they need empathy, or it's doctors and nurses. So in that vicious cycle, turnover was very high. They couldn't answer the phones on time, or when a rep answered the call, they couldn't answer the questions, so the transfer rate was very high. And supervisors were constantly fighting fires. And they had anxiety problems, right? They just had no time to do anything, and they had no time to lead people, develop people. So a new executive director comes to this call center, and her mandate is fix the customer experience. And she knew that in order to fix the customer experience, in order to keep the customers, serve the customers really well, they had to fix the employee experience, because the front lines is who delivers that experience. And Quest Diagnostics did a number of changes over time. So one of the first changes was they invested in their employees, they increased pay, they added very clear career paths so that people can see how they could grow within the organization, and they saw that their pay would also grow as they stayed with the organization. And along with pay investment, career paths, they had high expectations. They changed their attendance policy to be stricter. And when they announced the first attendance policy, one of the reps got up and he started clapping, because absenteeism was over 12%. And when absenteeism is that high and people are not showing up, it's the people who show up that end up paying for it. So they had that investment in people as one of the first changes that they made. But then they said, okay, how do we pay for the pay investment? And how do we pay for this? And one of the first changes that they made was on the focus and simplify. They talked to front lines, they spent time in the front lines, and they said, what are the things that we're doing that don't add value to the customer, right? What are some of the things that we can take out? And they found out that there were so many calls that they were receiving and so many calls that they were making that were needless calls. So they eliminated more than 10% of the call volume, which enabled them, subsidize the pay investment, but it also made the people's job a better job. And once Quest Diagnostics started reducing turnover, started having a more stable team, then they went on to empowering people and operating with Slack, etc. But this was an example of a company that didn't start out with a good job strategy, that transitioned. And within 18 months, they dropped their employee turnover by 52%. Even though they invested heavily in their people, they ended up having $2 million in savings, because turnover was costing them more than $10 million at the call centers. And also low productivity was costing them a lot of money. And they started getting, like you mentioned, ideas from their front lines, and those ideas that they got led to $1.3 million in savings. But the most important thing is they started winning with their customers, right? They could now answer the calls on time. Their transfer rates dropped from 12% to 9%. Calls that are answered within a minute went from something like 50% to 70%. So they started winning with their customers and stopped losing accounts. So this was an example of that type of transformation in a very different environment, not retail stores, low cost retail, but call centers.
It's so interesting, isn't it? And it's just a much better way to live your life is in a culture that's winning. Even if it's winning a little bit, I think that when people don't show up, it brings down the morale, and then the people that like you said are left there are stuck to figure things out, and it just keeps on getting worse and worse. I'd love to kind of go to sort of like, what are the headwinds you're experiencing as you've kind of come out with a book and had so many interesting conversations with CEOs, and I think there was one comment about the CEO of Walmart, Greg Foran, mentioned profit can hide many sins, which I thought was interesting, because there's a number of things that would prevent organizations from adopting or even beginning this. But you bring up that as one piece. Tell us some of the headwinds you're experiencing, some of the things you've heard from people that want to do it but they can't, or what are some themes you've noticed?
Yeah, the first one is what you mentioned. Mediocrity is profitable. Companies can stay that way and not having a great customer experience and employee experience, and they can stay around for decades, right? I don't want to name names, but there are so many companies that have been like that for decades. I think one of the biggest headwinds, Danielle, is when a company wants to adopt this good job strategy. It's not an HR strategy. It's not an operational strategy. It requires participation of so many functions that affect the work that frontline employees do. Because at the heart of the good job strategy is making sure that work is as productive as it can be and position employees to serve the customer as well as they can be. But at a call center, marketing, can affect the work that frontline employees do. Product design can affect the work that frontline employees do. So unless marketing or product design are part of the solution, you won't be able to adapt it. So the biggest headwind is how many functions in the home office need to participate to make this change. And the only way that they would participate is if the good job strategy is solving a real business problem. So when we work with companies, we encourage them to first articulate what is the problem that you're trying to solve with this? What is the problem around your customers? How does, not creating enough value for the customer, how is that affecting your profitability, your growth? Let's figure out that big urgent problem to solve and use the good job strategy as a solution to that problem. And we encourage leaders to use, different people are moved by different things, right? We have some people are moved only by numbers. So for them, we need to make a case with numbers. Look, turnover is costing us this much, shrink is costing us this much, etc. Some people are moved by competitiveness. They want to work for an organization that wins. They want to work for an organization that's great. Some people are moved by camaraderie, a sense of purpose. So tell the story and frame this urgency using different understanding that people have different motivations, and tell the story of why you need to change using these different motivations. So and make sure that you know what problem you're solving. And without that, we found it's very difficult to make the types of changes that need to be made.
Yeah, in the midsection of her book, she titles the subheading "Courage," and you walk us through a number of different examples. From just having the fear, beliefs, not having your values and figured out, and drawing from the courage of each individual leader. We're going to dive into our last section of this interview. We've already gone through about 40 minutes, which is fantastic. While we're kind of rounding the corner, if anyone would like to sprinkle in some questions as I go through this next section, we'd love to. If there's anything that I can ask Professor Tan, we would love to do that. Walk us through, let's see. I'm trying to think here where to take us. We have. You mentioned an example of where I forget which organization, but I think it's worth sharing. There was tenure of CEOs only lasting a short period of time. And that this particular CEO wanted to do something in the good job strategy, but was fearful that they would get started and then not be able to finish the work. Tell us that story about that, because I think that bodes well around the courage of leadership. You can still make a change regardless, but it's a personal decision. Tell us that story.
Yes, it's 2017. John Turner becomes the CEO of Sam's Club. Sam's Club is a part of Walmart. It's Costco's competitor. When he becomes the CEO of Sam's Club is completely lagging Costco in terms of productivity, in terms of customer satisfaction, membership growth, sales, in terms of turnover. And John Turner, he diagnoses, he looks at the situation and he realizes that their prices are too high. It's a membership model, right? Sam's Club is a membership model. So you have to pay to be able to shop at these stores. So the prices have to be very low so that it's worthy of the membership costs. And he realizes the prices are too high, in-stocks are too low, members are not excited about their experience. And when he looks into why, he sees so much of these problems are driven by high employee turnover. Right? Employees haven't been there for a long time, so there are customer service problems, so there are inventory problems, and he finds Sam's Club in this vicious cycle. But here's the thing. John is Sam's Club's 14th CEO since 1983. If you do the math, you realize that a typical CEO stays in that position for about 3 years. So now he has 3 years. There's an organization in that vicious cycle. So many things have to change. And if one is in his shoes, how afraid they might be. This comes to the courage part, right? First, people investment is not as legitimate in the eyes of boards, in the eyes of analysts. In fact, in 2015, when Walmart announced a set of pay investments, their stock price dropped significantly in one day because investors don't really like people investments. So this investment doesn't have that much legitimacy. Two is he realizes that he needs to make pay investment, but his own HR team comes and says, hey, don't raise pay. Last time we raised pay, it didn't reduce turnover. Because organizations are oftentimes, especially large organizations, work in silos. And we love, I mean, I'm at MIT Sloan, so we love numbers, we love analysis. And when we evaluate each decision, we say, what is the return on that investment? So if you're investing in pay, like if I pay people more, what's the return? Well, leaders are not lab scientists. Things don't happen to them, right? It's not that you increase pay and this is what's going to happen. You have agency over what's going to happen. But John is hearing this, don't do this, last time we did it, it didn't work out. And he's going to be in that position for a short amount of time. His career is on the line, right? And his reputation is on the line. But he realized, yes, there are so many things to be afraid of. But the right thing to do, if we want to be a winning organization, if we want to win with our members, we need to offer them the highest quality products at the lowest possible prices. We can't do that if our frontline delivery isn't great. We can't do that if our employees don't make enough to do a good job. We can't do that if employees are not empowered to take care of the member. We can't do that if our employees their tenure is so low that they're making mistakes all the time. So he knew that the good job strategy, adopting that was the right thing to do. Yes, he had fear, but courage is not the absence of fear, right? Courage is you do the right thing. You do something that's risky because you know that it's the right thing to do. And he started the company on this journey, and 2 years, 9 months later, he got promoted to become the CEO of Walmart USA. So it worked out very fine for him. Within that 10-year, employee turnover, just like Quest Diagnostics, employee turnover dropped, productivity increased substantially, and customer satisfaction and sales increased as well.
Yeah, it's fascinating, and thank you for sharing that story, Zeynep, because I think that, you mentioned, reading the book, he also talks about the courage to own that decision, and even if it goes south, that, the onus is on him. And I thought that was also brilliant too, about communication and setting the tone that no one is going to be responsible but him,
Yes.
which is critically important when you're doing something drastic and you're doing a shift. A lot of employees could just stick it out and wait to see if this guy's going to stick around or not, right? So that happens, and I'm sure many of us have had leaders. They're like, let's see how long this guy or gal lasts, But
yeah, when we did the workshop with them, of course, like when CEOs change every 3 years, you have this too shall pass, right? That's what you think as an employee, as a manager, as a frontline leader. You say, 3 years later, it will be somebody else. But they have been now, since then, they had 2 more CEOs, and they're sticking to this. And now they're thinking about, now we have this amazing foundation. How do we grow? And how do we make sure that we sustain it?
Yeah. And, in the book, you also mentioned about how, even if all things are same, mediocre same, maybe they're making profits, but their metrics are poor with turnover, et cetera. If competition comes in, what do you think is going to happen? They might pay your team members more, and then you might be a sitting duck wishing you'd started this journey. We have a couple of questions in the chat. I would love to kind of, paraphrase some of the questions. And like Avanish mentioned something around, the question is, there's a dilemma he's experiencing between happy employees being productive or the other way around in a call center. Mentioned significant investments were made, trying to make employees happy, but they aren't as productive as desired. Mm-hmm. I'd love to hear sort of your research. Is there a correlation? Have you experienced the difference between happiness and productivity? Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think, the word happy is not one that we use all the time, but I will say, of course, it's important to have happy employees, but we need employees who have great work design that enables them to be productive, that enables them to take care of the customer. So I would encourage, maybe there's a there's an investment in people part, but I would encourage to look into those 4 choices and where are we on those 4 choices, right? Have we standardized, have we empowered, have we focused and simplified, have we cross-trained, and are we setting high expectations for our employees? So investing in people alone and happy people alone don't drive performance. We need the work to be set up for high productivity, high contribution, and high motivation.
Right, and the empowerment piece to help them be part of
Yes.
the solving the problems, so that there's a little bit of autonomy. And who knows? It could be a combination. It could be one thing. But you're right. It's a system. It requires all these things to be put together to make the impact that they're capable of. Thank you so much for that, and Avanish. We have another question about how good leadership is absolutely key to employee engagement, which I couldn't agree more, as well as performance and loyalty. How do you convince an organization to invest in leadership development for their leaders at all levels? Obviously, better empowered leaders empower people, but is there any comments or research or things you've experienced that tie that, that phrase in there?
One of the things that I learned from studying Toyota, studying Mercadona, and of course the whole quality management literature is that when there's a problem, to look at the system that drives that problem than to look at the people that drive the problem. I think oftentimes when we see poor performance, we go into how do we fix people? How do we fix leadership? How do we fix workers? But sometimes their system that they're in makes it very difficult for them to be great leaders. This is not to say leadership development, leadership training is not important. It's just that we also need the system that enables people to be great leaders. I'll give you one example. We were doing a workshop with a company, and they said they hired one of the star store managers from Costco. And Costco is known to have great store managers. And these are stores that have hundreds of $1,000,000 in sales, right? This is like not about $100 million in sales, and these are stores that have hundreds of people. So it's a big job to be a store manager. So this company hires a manager from Costco, and they said they couldn't survive in our environment. Why? Because turnover was so high. The leader was caught in this firefighting vicious cycle environment. Why? Because there were so many products, so many price changes. The work was so complex that even though they had lower sales, the work itself was harder. So yes, leaders are super important. But if we don't set the right conditions for them to succeed, then leadership training and investing in them alone is not going to be solving our problems. And I can say, like, so many organizations, Danielle, we see them wanting to do, let's just do training, right? But you can't train if you don't change the system, because what is required for training? Well, you need to have low turnover so that there's time for training. So it makes sense to invest in training. So looking at the system first before we look at people is one thing that I would mention.
Yeah, I get that a lot too in the work I do. And thank you for that question, Jermaine. It's a spot on question. And I concur. I think that, we get a lot of that, just send them to training, they'll learn. But then if they come back and let's just say they're learning fundamentals of how to be a bit better leader and how to have these conversations, how to coach people. But then this happens a lot sometimes too. But then senior leadership, their leaders are not even exhibiting those behaviors that they just got trained on. That could be a negative thing, because they'd be like, what, I don't even want to stay here. If I'm taught this and then other leadership is doing this, there's a disconnect. And I think that we've come a long way from the Industrial Revolution. So people want to be part of something bigger than themselves, giving them dignity in the workplace from pay and systematic empowerment is really what we require, I think, as human beings. Not to say we didn't need it before, but this is the evolution of where we're at today. So we're about to carve out the next 2 minutes, 3 minutes left of our session today. It's been a true delight. I have to say, I've read this book from cover to cover, have tons of notes. I felt like when I was reading it, I couldn't put it down. I was like, she's saying exactly what I felt in my heart. So thank you for this. Thank you for your dedication. I want to ask one last question for you, and that's sort of, tell us what's ahead for you. What's your vision for the future? I know you have got some really bold goals, which are exciting. And how can we get involved wherever we're at in the world or our level? So what's ahead for you, and how can we help if we want to be part of your movement?
Thank you. So our goal at Good Jobs Institute is to improve 10 million low-wage jobs and make them into good jobs. And what's ahead for me is to continue pursuing that goal. Maybe I'll leave you with something from Clay Christensen, the late Clay Christensen, with some inspire you to action. So Clay Christensen, some of you might know disruptive technology. He was a very famous professor, and he used to talk about how management is the most noble profession if it's done right, because the decisions that we make as managers end up affecting the lives of human beings. It ends up affecting how that person comes home to their family, right? Do they come home energized, want to spend time with their partner, become a better son, daughter, or parent? Or if their dignity is crushed, they're so tired and they don't want to talk to anyone. That's the type of impact that we managers have on others. So at a minimum, I think one thing that I ask everyone is to recognize their role as managers and how much they can affect the lives of humans that they manage. And the other one is, if they're inspired by this, please, take a look at the book. We have a lot of free materials on Good Jobs Institute. And if any organization is interested in adopting this, let us know. We have a fantastic team and would love to be helpful, or would love to send you to the right resources. But we need more good jobs to create a stronger middle class. We need more good jobs for people to have hope. And I think that will be good for companies, and that will be good for our society. So thank you so much for being part of this and for listening. And thank you, Danielle, for your fantastic questions and your enthusiasm for this subject. I appreciate it.
Oh my goodness. I feel like your energy and your message and the world you're trying to create is something I would like to be a part of. So it's a true honor. And I agree, like, leadership is a responsibility. And I think we have a legacy that we're trying to create for the future of our children and our grandchildren and so on. So it's a big task, but we have to challenge the status quo and put the effort in. And yes, I would say, even at a minimum, if you're in the United States or even near the other locations that she references in her book, take it upon yourself to go visit the organization, go shop there. I looked up Costco to see if I had Costco in my neighborhood. I don't have a Costco. I've got a Sam's Club, but that's okay. I went to Sam's Club. So, we can vote with our dollars as much as it is about our time and our energy and our initiative, because that's where we need to put our collective energy, because that's kind of our collective vote with where we want the world to go. So thank you all so very much. We really get to most of the questions. Anju, I apologize not having quite enough time to get there, but we are glad you joined us, and I hope you have a fantastic week. Thank you, Professor Tan, for joining us today.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.